Hey everyone, this is part one of a multi-part series of me building a budgeting app. Now, if you're here and you haven't watched the intro video, you should stop here, go watch the intro video, and then come back. And if you have, let's get started. So I'm going to be using Ruby on Rails as my programming language and framework to build this out. And the only thing I've done so far is run Rails new and let that finish, and you can sort of see here that that's finished. And so if I cd into the application, which is budget, I can ls, and you can see that this is sort of just a stock Rails app. And so for my tools, I'm using iTerm, and then inside of that, I'm using tmux. For actually writing the code, I'm going to be using Vim. So the first thing we should do is just start the server, and so I'm going to open up into a new pane. I'm going to run Rails S. And this will start the Puma server, and I'm going to go over to Safari, and there it is. Yay, you're on Rails. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is create a route, a root route, get some text on the page just to make sure everything's running. And I guess I should talk about the goals of this first part of this first video is to sort of just get the development environment set up and perhaps to get some models set up and get some inputs set up so I can start uploading statements and parsing them and just sort of laying the framework for what I intend to do. So if we look in config routes, you can see that the routes is empty. So I'm just going to create a root route, and I'm going to say home index. One thing you'll notice right now is I'm not running any tests. That's because I don't quite know what I'm even doing yet. I have an idea. I want to get something on the screen so I can start playing around with it, and so I can start learning and seeing how, which direction I want to take it, etc. So I'm not going to write any tests. I'm also not going to write the code in any sort of scalable way. I'm going to write the bare minimum to do the job that I'm trying to do, and over time, I'll refactor and make things faster and more scalable and whatnot. So if I do root home index, the next thing I need to do is create a home controller. So I'm going to go to app controllers, home controller. I'm going to create a home controller. And then an index method. Great. So I now need to create a view for that. So I'm going to create a view, the index.html.erb. Open that up here, home index, great. So now I'm just going to create a h1 and call it home. Perfect. If I go back to Safari and I refresh, I should see home. Great. So how about we put a little form on the page to that will allow me to upload a statement, so I can potentially start parsing it, grabbing data from it, saving it to a database, and displaying it on the screen. So to do that, I am going to use the form tag helper in Rails. And I don't quite remember exactly how that helper is structured, so I need to do something here, and I'll come back to that. And then I'm going to put in inputs. I'm going to give this input a label for upload. I'll actually name it something useful. Great. Perfect. And I want to be able to upload a file here. So I'm actually just going to go to Safari and just Google how to upload a file using an input. So, because I don't quite remember off the top of my head. So if you give it a file type file, we'll give it a name, possibly a placeholder, and then it accepts certain types of files. Great. So we're going to say the type is file, the name is going to be upload, placeholder is going to be please upload file, and then it's going to accept just the CSV file for now. And let me just make sure I type that correctly. It's accept. Okay, so I also need to just Google the properties of form tag. So it says that form tag is soft deprecated. That's good to know. And I should be using form with instead. So perfect. Okay, this is what I want. Okay, so I'm going to say form with. I'm going to give it a URL, probably /upload. I'm going to make its method a post. And then I'm going to use the label tag and text field helpers that Rails provides, and then I'll add a submit tag as well. Now, there's probably a different helper for uploading files, so we're just going to go to the uploading files tab. Let me find it. Where is it? Using form helpers. There we go. Okay. So we're going to say URL, action upload, multi-part true, the file field tag. Great. And let's just read this really quickly. Okay. So the form must be set to multi-part. Great. Great, so we're going to say form with URL action upload multi-part true, and then we're going to use this file field tag helper. Okay. So we're going to say form with URL action upload multi-part true. And we're still going to use the label tag, and we're just going to call this upload. And then we're going to use the file field tag. We're going to assign it to that label, and we're going to say upload a file as its name. And we're going to do the same submit tag. Submit. Great. Now let's go back to our Rails app and see what happens. Cool, so there's an error. It looks like there's a syntax error. So I might be missing a parentheses or something of that nature. So I'm going to Google Rails file field tag. I'm going to look at the doc specifically for that. Okay, so we need a label for file, file to upload, file field tag file, submit tag. Okay, so we're going to say that this is simply upload. And if we look at what options are available, it's accept, multiple, disabled. Okay, so we're actually going to add the accept option. And if we look here, it is just a string with the options separated by commas. So I'm going to do that. And we're just going to accept a CSV for now. If we go back to the browser and we look at it again, still an error. So there's some syntax that's wrong here. Oh, I'm missing a closing quote. Okay. And here I'm missing a do. Just a few typos. Great. So now it says no route matches action upload. That's perfect. This is telling us that our home controller doesn't have an upload route. And that's not good enough. I also need to add it here. Only, actually, I'm just going to say resources home. Okay. That was not enough. That's okay. Let's look at rake routes. And this will show us all of our routes. So I think I need to add a post home upload route. And that's to, I'm going to actually Google this. So Rails add post routes, just so I can get the formatting correctly, the syntax. So I can say post to some route, and I'm going to route that to some controller and some controller action. Great. And if I think I can just do this as shorthand. So I'm going to try that and run rake routes again. I cannot. So this just needs a controller. So I'm going to tell it it's the home controller. Run it again. Missing action key. So instead, I'm going to say to home upload. I'm going to do what the docs tell me. Great. So now there's the upload route, and that is going to home controller, which is exactly what we want. Let's try that again. Perfect. So now we have the upload label. We have an input and then a submit button. I'm actually going to look at the styles here. And so this says that the label is for upload and our input is an upload, so that's good. We always want our label for and our input ID to be the same. And then we have a submit button, which is great. Okay. I kind of want these to be on their own line, so I'm actually going to just write some CSS briefly. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to open up the application CSS file. It's in style sheets. Great. And there's some default CSS that I like to add to all projects, so I'm actually just going to go through and do that now. So for every element, I'm gonna remove any default browser margin padding, and I'm going to make it a border box. Great, and then for my HTML and my body, I'm going to just set the width and height so I have better control over that later. And then the font size I'll make 16 for now. Great. So now I just want to say label and input. And I want to make this a block, so I'm going to say display block. So let's go back to Safari. Great. So now the label and input are on new lines, and you can see the default padding that Safari gave me is now gone. That doesn't look great, so inside the body, I'm going to add it back. I'm going to say padding 1 rem. And the benefit of doing this is now I have full control over the look and feel of the application instead of utilizing any defaults that Safari gives us. Okay. So now we have some padding on the sides. Just to make it a little easier on the eyes, I'm going to add some padding in between some from the home, and then also between the form, the input in the label, and the button. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come back over here, and I'm going to surround the label and button with a div. I'm just going to say that this is a form item. I'm going to close that div. And I'll go back to our CSS. And for form items, we're going to give it a bottom margin of 2 rem. And also for H1s, and actually for all of our headings, we're going to give it some padding. So we want to just say perhaps 2 rem at the top and none left and right. Great. So now let's come back. Perfect. So now we have padding for home. The padding that I intended to have around this div did not end up working, so let's figure out why. That's actually because I misspelled it, and just typo there. Perfect. Okay, so now we have a home, we have an upload button, and a submit. So if I select choose file, I actually have July's, so this past month's Apple Card transactions in a CSV file. So this is what I'm going to use as to sort of build this off of. So I'm going to select that. Cool. So now you can see the file was selected. And just to make sure that it ends up in the right place, because I want the upload to be attached to this route. So I'm going to put a binding.pry. Binding.pry, or I should say pry, is just a debugger in Ruby. The default debugger that comes with Rails is something called bybug. I actually don't like using bybug, so I'm going to replace that with pry, and then I'm going to bundle. Great. So now we have pry in our route. If we submit this, undefined method binding.pry. So I'm just going to restart my server. Sometimes after adding a new gem, the server needs to be restarted, so it'll load the gem properly. I'm going to submit it again. Perfect. So now we're inside of our pry. So if we look at params, so params has an authenticity token, which is sort of an internal Rails thing, and then an upload key. So if we look at upload, oops, params. Great, so here's our file. It is a CSV file. I have the headers, I have the original file name, and I also have a temp file. And if we read that temp file, you can see it's all of my transactions, which is great. Perfect. Okay. So we now have a sense of what we need to do. Instead of adding the code to start processing this file right into the controller, I do generally follow the pattern of having small controllers and offloading all that logic to service classes, and then also offloading logic that belongs in the models to the models, but generally having the controllers as sort of lightweight as possible. So in this case, I want to process this credit card statement, which is a CSV file. So I'm going to create a service class for that. And in Rails, what you would do is just create a directory inside of app called app services. And then I'm going to make a new file inside of that directory, and I'm going to call it upload statements. Nope, because we're not uploading a statement, we're processing the statement. So I'm going to actually call it a statement processor. Great. So now I can open that statement processor, and I can create the class, give it an initializer, and I think for now I'll just take in the temp file, and I'll assign that to a local variable inside the class. Great. So here I can call the statement processor .new with our params upload.temp file. I'm going to assign that to a variable called processor. And I'll probably want to just create some run method on processor, so I'll just create that method now. Okay. So after this processor is done running, I want to redirect the user back to the same page and perhaps add a flash message saying upload successful or upload failed. So we're going to do that. We're just going to assume that the run method always works because for now it's nothing. We'll do edge cases later. So I'm going to say flash info is upload successful. I'm going to redirect to home index. And so now in my view, if there is a info flash message, then I'm going to add a div, we'll just call it flash, and inside of that there's going to be a span that actually has the contents of the flash message. Do that just like that. There's a typo there. Great, so if we now open up our application CSS again, and we just add some quick styles to the flash. I'm just going to give it some basic padding. I'm going to give it a background color. I want like a muted yellow color. Those are pretty common on flash messages. I'm actually just going to Google flash message to see if that helps. Here's something that tells you how to do it in Flask. That's not what I want. Adding that actually didn't help. Let's go to the site. Add request. Oops. And what I'm really looking for is hex codes. So, there. This lemon color looks nice. So I'm going to just pop that in there. One thing I'll do here is actually just set my font color to something that isn't black. We'll go back. this is frozen because I'm actually still inside of my pry debugger, so I'm going to quit that because it takes over the web server. Okay, so I'm going to try this again. I'm going to choose upload, I'm going to submit, and nothing happened, so let's go look at our logs. Uninitialized constant home controller statement processor. For some reason, the live reloading of my server isn't working when I add new files or gems. I'm pretty sure that's the issue. This is saying that it can't find a class named statement processor. And it's definitely created and should be eager loaded. So I'm actually just going to refresh the page, go through that process again, hit submit. And it looks like that was done successfully. Perhaps our redirect is incorrect. So I'm gonna, what's interesting is the submit button is now permanently disabled, and I would have expected a flash message. So perhaps our redirect was incorrect. So yeah, I can try that. I can redirect to the root path and see if that does any different. Perfect. So now our upload is successful. We refresh, it's gone. Let's just run through the whole process one more time. Submit, upload successful. Amazing. Amazing. Okay. I'm going to add just some margin to that, just so it's not hugging that button. This isn't how I would actually go about adding CSS to things if I had a better sense of what I was doing, but I just want to look decent while I'm testing things out. Okay. So we now have this statement processor class that accepts the temp file, which is my Apple Card CSV statement. We call run on it. If right now it assumes that it's always going to be successful, so it sets this upload successful flash message and then redirects to the root page. I'm thinking the next thing to work on would be to actually do some stuff inside of this run method. So what we want to do is parse the CSV file. If we look at the CSV file, let's put a binding in here. We'll actually keep returning string. That way we can start looking at the CSV file and we can use some CSV libraries to help us parse it. So we're going to upload it again, submit it. We should be in our debugger now. We are. The temp file should be in a local variable. It is. And if we read it. So it looks like this is a typical CSV file. There's a heading row with transaction dates, clearing dates, descriptions, merchants, category, type, and amounts. For this first row, the transaction date is July 30th. The clearing date is August 1st. It's for an e-toll, which is the description. The merchant is e-toll budget. So I'm thinking of using, I want to know the transaction date, and I'm thinking of using the merchant as opposed to the description, because all I really care about is who the merchant was. Category is other, so that's not super helpful. I probably won't end up using the categories that Apple assigns to my purchases. I would want to do that myself. It's a type purchase, which is good, and then the amount in USD is 2140. Great, and you can see the next transaction line here is for the 31st, and it was an Uber trip. The merchant was Uber, it's a purchase for 2641. Cool. I'm going to close some of these tabs. The next step would be I'm just going to Google how to use the Ruby CSV library, just so I can get it done correctly. So csv.new takes a string or an IO, and it can take some options. Let's see what are the options it can take. So let's go to the new method. So it's data, and then a whole bunch of different options. Our file has headers, so we're going to say headers true. And I think that might be the only thing that we need to do. Then once we have this CSV object, we can loop through each of them and get our row. And so we can do this right now, actually. We can just require the CSV library, and we can see csv.new at tempfile.read. We can assign it to a variable, csv.length. There's no method length for CSV, but there is an each. Is there a first? Appears though there is. I think once we read the temp file, we can't read it again. Yeah, so that's empty. So we're going to need to do that over again. I'm actually going to just put that code in here. And for our options, we're going to say headers true. Great. So I'm going to leave that binding.pry. We have a CSV. CSV.each. I'm pretty sure that's something I can do. Do row puts row transaction dates. I'm pretty sure that was the name of the header. Merchant and amount USD. Merchant and then amount USD. Just make sure I didn't typo that. I didn't. Okay. New transaction. Cool. So hopefully we'll see a row of print statements for each of the transactions, which is what that should be doing. So we're going to upload again our CSV. Going to submit, come in here. Great, and we can see all of the transactions. So key food, lemonade, there are some negative values in here. Those are probably statements, or those are probably line items where I paid my credit card. So we actually want to avoid those because I don't, in the context of a budgeting app, I don't care if I paid it. I just want to know how much I spent, at least in the context of what I'm thinking about right now. So here's a negative app that is a purchase. It's probably a refund. I had a few of those in July. What about a negative value that is not a refund or not a purchase? What is the other type? I'm just sort of scanning this document for negative values, if I can find one. So here's another negative, but that's a purchase. This is a purchase. Daily cash adjustment. So here's a debit. That might be interesting. And actually, we might not even need to look at the other type, although it would be helpful. So instead of going through and looking at it that way, what I actually am going to do is just puts the row type. So we can look at it side by side. I think that would be faster, and that might be information I'm interested in anyway. Scroll to the top just to make sure I didn't typo. I didn't. Great. And I'm going to remove the debugger because I don't think we necessarily need that right now. I am stuck here because I'm still in a binding.pry there. Upload the file once more. Submit. Look at iTerm. Look at some negative values. So my deposit was also, it was a payment instead of a purchase. Great. So all I really care about are purchases. So we're going to pull the transactions from this list. I'm hoping that not only can I each over it, but I can also map. That would be sad if I can't. So there is an each, but there is no map. I'm looking at the 2.6.1 docs, which I'm actually using Ruby 2.7.1, but I wouldn't think that the CSV part of the standard library would have changed between those two. Okay, so I don't see it. That's fine. What we can do instead is I'm going to make a transactions variable. I'm going to assign it to an empty string. And if the row type is purchase, right, let me just verify that that's what I want. Yep, purchase. Then we're going to add that row to the transactions array. Cool, and then we can put transactions at the end of all of that. Upload the file, submit it, it was successful. And so now we have all of our transactions. Great. Instead of this being a CSV row, I actually want to parse out a little bit because I think that'll make it a little bit easier to manage going forward. So we're going to say date is row transaction date. And then amount is row amount USD. And then our merchant is row merchant. Great. So now instead of having to remember what the CSV sort of column was, and I've already had to go back and forth a number of times, I have it right here in the code. Each record, each item in this transactions array is going to be an object that looks like this. I'm just doing the date, merchant, and amount right now because I think that's all that I'll need. But that might not be true going forward, but we'll see. That's what I'm going to do for now. Okay. So let's run this again. We're going to choose the file. We're going to upload it. We're going to submit it. Cool. That's awesome. You have everything listed here. Okay. Gonna make that 0. I noticed that it was sort of misaligned over here. I wanted to fix that. Okay. So I think now it would be nice if we can save these to the database and then show them on the index page. So what that'll look like is you choose a file to upload, you hit submit, a flash message pops up, and then under that is all of our transactions being pulled from the database. I think that would be the next thing I would want to do. And that's probably, once we do that, a good stopping point. So let's try that. So I don't have any database models set up. I don't even think I've run the create database commands. I'm going to do that. I'm going to say Rails create DB. Actually, I think it's Rails DB create. I forget those sometimes. Great. So now our database already exists. That's actually an artifact of probably work. So I am going to delete those databases, and I can just use PSQL. I'm going to say drop database budget development. I have to shut that down. It's being accessed by other users. Yes, yes, yes. I'm going to quit everything. I'm going to try that again. Drop database budget test. Cool. So now those two databases are gone. Start my server again. Rails db create. Perfect. Okay. Created the databases. Great. So we want to save the transactions to the database. So I'm just going to create a database table called transactions. And so I'm going to use I'm going to create a migration, db migrate, create transactions. So what this will do is it'll generate a migration file, db migrate. What is the command for this? Let's Google, I forget. Rails create database migration. Active record migrations. Rails generate migration. Cool. Some of these commands have changed since in the newer versions of Rails. So I'm going to say Rails generate migration, create transactions. Cool. So it created a file in the db migrate folder. So I'm going to pull that up, create transactions. Great, because I used the right syntax in the CLI, it knew that I wanted to create a table called transactions. And if we pull up the statement processor, this is going to have a date, a merchant, and then an amount. So we're going to say t.date is just called date. Merchant can be a string, just call it merchant. And amount is probably going to be a decimal, call it amount. And precision, just 2 decimal points. And I need to tell it how big I want it to be. I'm actually going to say Rails decimal field. That's not what I want. Precision and scale. Okay, so precision is how many numbers after the decimal point. Scale is how many numbers overall. So we're going to say scale 10 because I'm not doing big transactions like that. And then we're going to add timestamps. Now if we do Rails db migrate, that will run that transaction and it should create the decimal table. Scale 10 must be between 0 and precision, so I might be mixing those things up. Scale precision. So, okay, yeah, so this will allow you to have 10 digits after the decimal point and 15 digits max. So precision is how many digits max, and scale is how many digits after the decimal point. So I'm going to say scale is 2 and precision is 10. Perfect. We have our transactions now. Next thing I need to do is create a model. So class transaction. It should be named singular. And this is an application record. That's all I need to do there. I'm not going to worry about any sort of field validation right now. I just want to save it to a database and get it on the screen. I can open up Parse the Csv, which is my GUI Postgres app of choice. I'm going to edit that. That all looks correct. So now we can see that there's a transactions table, there's a date field, an ID field, a merchant amount, created at and updated at. Perfect. And so actually, we want to save these transactions to the database. What we can do is just say transaction.create and actually just put that up here. So we can remove this transactions object. And we can create our transaction right in line. And let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so uninitialized constant statement processor CSV. So what I'm going to do here is simply go to the top of the class and require CSV. That should help with that error. Submit, upload successful, great. We can see that there were a number of commit statements done in our database. We can pull up Parse the Csv, refresh, and we see our transactions here. We don't see the date. It's actually there for a few of them, but not all of them, and that's because the default date format isn't supported, so I need to change that. Cool. So let's come back here. And so actually, if we look at our CSV, we can get there at the very top of the file. Actually, we can see here. So our date is in this month/day/year format. And if we open up IRB and we acquire dates, and we say date.parse 07/30/2020, the Ruby standard library doesn't actually know how to parse that date. But there's another function we can use where we pass date a parse string inside of Ruby. Yeah, string p time. So here we can give it a date and then tell it the method we're using to format it, and this will help us be able to parse it. So let's try that. So string p time, we're going to give it our dates, and then our parsing string. And we can see that worked correctly. Perfect. And if we pass in a date object to active record, it will say that correctly for us. So we're going to say string p time /d/year. Okay. Set that. Statement. Okay. So we're going to exit that out. Come back to Safari, try to upload that again. Before I do that, I'm actually going to just delete all the rows here. I'm going to upload. I'm going to submit. Submit was successful. We see a bunch of insert statements, refresh the page, and now each of our transactions are here with the date. Perfect. So we can go back to our index file and simply show them in a table. So I'm just going to say table. We'll give it a class name. Just call it table for now. This is going to have a head. We'll say date. And then we'll say merchant. And then we'll say amount. So that'll be the headings of our table. And then we create a table body. And we want to loop over all of our transactions. So we're going to end up seeing that in a transactions local variable, each transaction. Okay. And for each transaction, we're going to create a row. And then each row is going to have a column. It's not TC. What is it? I should know this. It is TD. Oops. So the first is the date. So we're actually just going to say transaction.date, because that's what it's called inside of our table, inside of our model. Then we're going to say merchant and amount. Great. So the only thing left is to define this transactions local variable. We're going to go to our home controller, and we're going to say the transactions is equal to transaction.all. So all of our transactions. And then we're going to go to the application CSS file. And for our table, we're going to add some margin at the top. So we're going to say 2rem at the top, just like that. Okay, so if we refresh the page, now we should see all of our transactions. Great, we do. Perfect. So just to test this all the way through, let's delete our transactions. We refresh the page, they're gone. We can see our empty table. We upload our CSV file, we hit submit, and we have all of our transactions. Great. So I think this is a good stopping point. We are starting to lay the foundation of what we want to do, where we can upload statements and parse statements and start saving that information to our database. Some things that we might want to do next is make sure if we upload the statement multiple times, the same statement multiple times, we don't just create new rows in our transactions table. I think that's something that we should end up doing. Maybe not next, but that's something that we need to do at some point. Probably the next thing is to support a different statement type. So instead of an Apple Card CSV, perhaps the Apple Card PDF statement, we can build support for that. I'm not sure. We will figure that out next time. For now, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Bye.